In a nutshell, since you can find my profile in other places, I've been doing this math education stuff for over 40 years, and I see myself as a change agent. I see myself as a catalyst for change. In the last couple of years, I've realized that all I really do in this world anymore is I validate outliers. People who are crazy enough to take an hour on a Tuesday night and worry about professional development in math, and I sprinkle a lot of empowerment dust. And so that's really what tonight is about. It's about a whole bunch of ideas I have about professional development and how to make it work so it's more than just PD done to us. And so if that makes sense, I just want you to know that the last talk I gave was in Palm Springs a week and a half ago. It was Friday. It was 3:40 in the afternoon, and we called it Detention. It was perfect. And look at this. Here we are on Tuesday night before Thanksgiving. I'm in a hotel room with my granddaughter in Savannah, Georgia, because 9 members of my family are flying into Savannah tomorrow. And it was just easier for me to drive down through Durham with my granddaughter, whose parents decided to go to Africa for this vacation. And so I assume that you're as crazy as I am, sitting at home when you should be worrying about Thanksgiving and travel plans and the weather. And so if all that makes sense, let's play. All right? I mean, so there it is. All good professional development, all good presentations begins with tell them what you believe. And so I'm going to just lay down a gauntlet, and I'm going to remind you that it's pretty clear that what passes for professional development, I mean, it's pathetic, and you know it's pathetic, primarily because it's seriously underperforming. It doesn't really change our knowledge. It doesn't change our classroom practice. It doesn't change our beliefs. And therefore, most of what passes for professional development is neither professional, nor does it develop. And you all know that it rarely improves student achievement. And so what I'd like to do this morning, this evening, this afternoon, I noticed that somebody is here from Beijing. So this morning in Beijing and this evening everywhere else, I want to take a careful look at why this is the case and how we can make some very accessible but unfortunately radical changes in what passes for professional development. And so if all that makes sense, what I really want to do is help you build a game plan for trying out, for advocating for, and in fact for demanding consistent opportunities that are not a waste of our time, that use embedded professional development, that use the abilities and the talents and the knowledge amongst our colleagues to build professional growth in ways that have been missing. That is, let's just be blunt. I mean, just because they won't treat up, that should be us, just because they won't treat us like professionals doesn't mean that we can't and must act like professionals. I mean, we are, and the professionals that we are need to take responsibility for our own professional growth to better serve our students. And I want to move from this generalized stuff to some very particular kinds of ways that we can do that. And so all I want you to do is just pause for a second. Okay, I mean, I will not do as wonderful a job as Jo Boaler does when she does her webinars. I won't stop long enough, and I won't give you enough opportunities, but I am smart enough to know, stop. We're only 5 minutes into this, right? Thinking about my last professional development. In the 2 or 3 weeks following that event, which of those is most appropriate? Well, I did nothing. It was a waste of my time. I tried 1 or 2 things. Yeah, I made some minor changes, and in fact, they're actually still being practiced. Or I made some major changes, and it really has changed how I teach. So we could raise hands and do all kinds of other things, but I think that you know that for most of us, most of the time, with what passes for professional development, most of us do nothing. But we try 1 or 2 things, they don't work, we get no support, we try them once by ourselves, we don't do it collaboratively, and it's done. And at best, we go for professional development that's imposed upon us, and we make some minor changes that, in fact, actually stick there. And so I think that the question that we need to ask is, why is that so? Why is it that most professional impact has so little, professional development has so little impact? And I think that we all know. I mean, the litany of reasons, it's one shot. In a world where nobody learns anything after one or two, one experience. One size fits all is absurd. We're all different, right? It's thrown together. It's part of a smorgasbord of options. You know, our assistant superintendent or assistant principal goes and simply says, all right, we'll do this for the math people and this for the English language arts people. And there's no opportunity to practice. You know, it's rarely done collaboratively. It's only marginally connected to the actual teaching of math, all the generic professional development that goes on, right? And it's only tenuously connected to the real things. If you and I were to sit down and say, how can I help you improve the quality of your teaching and your students' learning, it's unlikely that there would be an overlap between what you tell me and what in fact passes for professional development. And so, I mean, just look at this. This is my life. I mean, last spring, I'm in an unnamed Florida district. There's no sense in calling them out, right? All-day professional development for all the K-5 teachers. And so the morning in Florida, this is 3 months after Parkland. The morning is obviously actor-shooter training. I kid you not. They had lunch, and guess who shows up on strengthening the teaching and learning of mathematics in our elementary schools from 1:15 to 4 o'clock. I'd like you to think about how unfortunately common that is. It's like, oh, we have a little slot for you. We'll talk at people. We'll engage them a little bit. But in large measure, this is the way in which our professional development is done to us. I want you to think about spending the morning as a teacher dealing with the horrors of active shooter training, of having to deal with these real issues of, do you lock the doors and do what they tell you and leave the kid that's in the hall that went to the bathroom in the hall? Or do you open the door and break all the rules? I mean, where are you? What kind of a person? I mean, you are being asked to make some hard decisions about what it means to be a professional, what it means to be a human being, what it means to handle a totally chaotic situation in active shooter training. And then after lunch, Steve comes along and, oh, well, we'll strengthen teaching learning. So it's PD that's done to us. It's done to fix us. It's done where the expectations for change have no connection to how little impact it has. And so it's not like I'm trying to be negative, but I think that we've got to sit there and say something better has to happen. So let's just look at the research. Just look at how the research tells us all these things. And like so often, like with professional development, like with schools in general, so much of what we do is totally disconnected from common sense and from research. I mean, when Garet, Porter, and Desimone did this giant study of the Eisenhower program, for those of you who are 40 or older and you remember the Eisenhower program, we did a giant evaluation at AIR, and we know that the 3 core features of professional development that actually made a difference, and this was sort of like core for all kinds of thinking about planning professional development for most of the first decade of this century, is there was a focus on content knowledge. Great. There were opportunities for active learning, and there was coherence with other learning activities. Now, I could stop right there and sit there, and part of the problem with these webinars is there's very little active learning. Some of you guys are watching television as well as listening to this. Some of you are doing email. I'm not going to stop long enough to actually get you engaged. We're not going to use the chat room the way in which we could. So in fact, this is also part of the problem, except that you walk away with all the slides, and hopefully when we're done with 2 or 3 cool ideas that you go, you know what, Steve is crazy, but slide 34 had 2 really neat ideas that I'm going to bring that back to my department, bring back to my school when we come back after the Christmas break. The point being that we've got lots of research that shows that there are ways to improve it. AIR spent almost $30 million of your taxpayer money to do 2 giant IES random controlled professional development impact studies. I can't tell you how incredibly well designed the professional development was, how well designed these studies were, and when all was said and done, when we put together 3 days of incredibly well-designed professional development in the summer, 5 days spread out appropriately timed for the content during the school year. We add on some coaching. We had a whole array of quality measures of teacher knowledge, quality measures of classroom practice, and of student achievement. We didn't just take things off the shelf. And in both studies, we found no, or in one case, very little change in teacher knowledge. There was no change in teacher classroom practice. And this was professional development at its very best. And therefore, there was no change in student achievement. And everyone says, well, so it's hopeless. Or everyone said, well, it didn't work. Well, I think that what we've learned is that when it is disconnected, and when it's not collaborative, and when it's not tied directly to our teaching, when it doesn't involve coaching, then we have a lot of reasons to understand why most of what passes for professional development doesn't do what it needs to do. And so I just remind you that what's typical is done to us, not with us, and we need to change that. What's typical ignores common sense and research, and we need to turn it around and say, what does common sense say? And what's typical hasn't worked and therefore needs to change. And so, I mean, here's my irreverent question for all of you. I mean, seriously, which is a bigger waste of time when we sit and talk about teaching mathematics, kindergarten through 12th grade, assigning, completing, or reviewing homework where no one learns anything, or sitting through another after-school one-shot professional development session where we check email and grade papers and pay attention with about a quarter of our brain. And I think that most of us as teachers know, and unfortunately most of us as department heads and assistant superintendents and curriculum directors know that just as homework is something we do and we do with little real impact and ignoring most of the research about distributed practice, professional development is very similar. And so, pause. I mean, how far off am I? I mean, if I'm making you mad, then I'm going to sit there and say, wow, that's awesome. It means that you really are doing things in your school and in your district that are making a difference and that you ought to be proud of. But in most of the places that I'm in, and most of the teachers that I talk with, and most of the research that I see, suggests that I'm not very far off, and we need some alternatives. But I'm sorry, I can't just blah, 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 blah with this, and I can't do a webinar or a workshop without pausing and saying, wait a second, what are we trying to accomplish? What is it that represents the end result? When will I be happy that professional development has made a difference? And so I have been blessed the last 5 years to be able to have worked on and off in the Success Academy charter schools. I'll show you about their results in a second, but I'm in 6th grade. This is probably the single most impressive mathematics lesson that I have seen in the 10 years or the 9 years since the Common Core was released. I'm in 6th grade, and this is lesson 6 on expressions. So these are the 6 EE standards about equivalent expressions, equivalent equations. It is co-taught by Ali and Mabuber. In 2005, Ali and Mabuber were both 22 and 23. Mabuber lasted 1 year, and he's now on Wall Street. Ali is still teaching at Success Academy. She's moved, I think, to a different school. There were 19 scholars or students in the class, and this entire lesson was driven by 3 slides, by a number strings mini lesson, a math workshop task, and an exit ticket. Mabuber says, scholars, our goal today, read with me, is to identify, create, and understand equivalent expressions. And I'm sitting in the back of the room. I did not plan this lesson with these teachers. I walked in fresh and cold, and I'm sitting there with my Common Core going, where the heck did that goal come from? And I realized that all it says in the Common Core is students in 6th grade in 6EE will understand equivalent expressions. Look at what professional development do we ever have that really talks about just in time, job embedded, let's worry about our goal and the implications of the goal. These 2 kids sat with their school leader and recognized that you can't understand if you can't create, and you can't create if you can't identify. And just that goal informed the quality and the coherence and the organization of this lesson. Saisha, can you please repeat our learning goal? And at that point, I'm going, whoa, these are two brand new teachers. They are in a charter school. All the kids are black and brown in Harlem. And Saisha, can you repeat the learning goals? Saisha repeats it. Good. Let's begin with our number string. And so there it is. These slides were animated. I'm sorry. These slides that you have now are not animated. They're just PDF'd. I'm sorry about that. But think about, you only see number one. Turn and tell your partner, number one, 4 times 8 equals 3. 4 times the quantity 3 plus 5, equivalent, not equivalent. Pause, think on your whiteboard. Equivalent, not equivalent. Talk to your partner. Engage your, and I'm watching kids actively engaged. I'm watching this wonderful thing, and the most incredible thing of all, who thinks they're not equivalent? And 4 hands went up. These teachers understand that you want to play off of all the misconceptions. Just convince me that they're not equivalent. And the kid says equivalent means the same. One has an 8, the other has a 3 plus 5. They're not equivalent. The teacher says, what do we know about 4 plus 1 and 3 plus 2? Well, they both equal 5, but they're not equivalent either. And the teacher smiles and says, so we have to worry about another crazy word, equivalent, that may mean different things in English and in, well, hold on. How about the rest of you? Why do you think they're equivalent? And the class goes, well, they're equivalent because it's 32 and 32. What do you mean it's 32? Where did 32 come from? There's this whole discussion based upon just numbers. We know that algebra is the generalization of the arithmetic. And so the arithmetic is clarified. And so, well, we have to agree. We have to agree that equivalent doesn't mean the same. It means they have the same value. Now, will they always be equivalent? Is that expression always equivalent? And the class finally agreed it is. Look at this. You know how important this is. This is not go follow the rules. This is not go do the distributive property. This is now in number 2. Always, sometimes, never equivalent. Turn and tell your partner. Look at the quality of this teaching. Look at how we have the goals. And I'm going to summarize what we're seeing in about 3 minutes. But look at how we have a well-planned lesson where, well, if A is 3, then it's equivalent. Suppose A is 4. Well, it's not equivalent. How do you know? Suppose A is 2. Suppose A is minus 5. No, there's no other value but 3. Oh, cool. Well, if that's so easy, then what about in number 3? Class, turn and tell your partner. And everyone screams out, only equivalent of B is 5. And then we get to, obviously, the biggie. All right, there it is. There's the distributive property. There is this wonderful opportunity where turn and tell your partner whether number 4 is equivalent. Now, you know at this point, right, that it's like, well, wait a second. I mean, should it be? Should it not be? I'm sitting in the side of the room, and I'm listening to 2 kids say, they're not equivalent because you don't know that the value for x is the same on both sides of the equal sign. And I'm sitting thinking, how many kids have I taught this to? And I never in a million years thought about it because I never asked them. I never had them discuss. I never presented it as convince me that it is or it isn't equivalent. Now the class says, well, wait a second, doesn't x have to have the same value? Well, how do you know? And so look at how we have a choice about whether we resolve this or we leave it for now. And these 2 teachers said, good, so we're not going to resolve that right now. We've established that it may be equivalent, but it depends upon whether x has the same value on both sides and y. Are you ready? Cool. This comes straight out of Engage New York. I think that this particular math workshop task sucks. I mean, this is just a stupid task. But look at what happens. You need to see that this slide again is animated. You need to understand that the only thing the kids saw was Jan normally rides her bike to and from work. Think about 6th graders being asked, turn and tell your partner 3 things about Jan. Look at the engagement. Look at the questioning. Look at how we are now in reading language arts. No, we're in math. No, we're making inferential reasoning. And the kids go, Jan's in great shape. How do you say that? Well, because she rides her bike to and from work, she must be in great shape. Another kid says, well, maybe she's poor, or maybe she's a teacher and she can't afford a car. That's why she rides her bike to school. Teacher then goes, well, let's see more about Jan. And then the next line pops up. Her normal route is 18 miles from home to work. Teacher says, this was Mabuber. Now, Now what can you infer about Jan? And the kids all decided that she's definitely crazy. She goes 36 miles a day. She must be in great shape. Another kid says, I think she had a DWI because there's no other reason she'd be riding her bike and not taking a car. And there's this whole discussion about what's a DWI. One day she goes to a coffee shop on her way to and from work. And then the kids are convinced she's a teacher because only teachers need coffee before the kids and after the kids. And this adds, and this is why I think this is stupid, right? This adds X miles to a trip each way. Every single one of you knows that in planning a lesson, I got to be clear on my goal, and I have to have the right tasks, and you know that my best lessons all pivot on the one critical question that determines whether this lesson works or not. And there it is on the bottom of this slide. At that point, Allie says, all right, you have 10 minutes. Write and show the distance Jan travels using a diagram or a picture and two different but equivalent expressions. 10 minutes, I'm watching as kids do their stuff on the whiteboards. I'm watching as when they finish their discussion, they put their whiteboards up on the apron on the chalkboard that's up there, on the whiteboard that's there. I'm watching kids do a gallery walk. I'm looking and they, oh, we have that one. Oh, we didn't have that one. Oh, look at that. And here it is. This is not one of their teaching slides. This is my slide that captures all the things that were on all those whiteboards. And then Allie says to the kids, where's the mistake? It still boggles my mind that a 22, 23-year-old who's never taught before, who's in her first year of teaching, knows how to be a complete sadist, how to sit there and ask these questions that, you know there are no mistakes. You know how obnoxious it is to ask kids, find the mistake when there isn't one, and yet you know how powerful it is? And so I'm sitting in the back on the side with this room, I'm watching the kids work, and I am just amazed. And then they have a discussion about, so I don't understand, what does the 18 mean? What does the 18 mean in the diagram? What does the 18 mean in the bar model on the right? What about the 18? And then Mabuba says, so I was wondering which one uses the least amount of ink. I mean, it's not about simplification. This is not simplification. This is equivalence. They're all equivalent. There are no mistakes there. Right? And so why is it that 36 plus 2x uses the least amount of ink? What does it do? What does it represent? Where did it come from? And I think you all know that if you are not doing those diagrams when we're doing the distributed property, we're hurting kids. If all we do is A parentheses B plus C close parentheses, and we tell kids to distribute the A to the B and the A to the C and don't have those pictures, it's malpractice. And so look at the way in which the main task worked, and then let's see if we learned anything. This is a much more involved exit ticket than I ever see, but just look at how, all right, if you've learned anything, then you'll be able to tell yourself, by yourselves now on this little Post-it note, which ones are equivalent, which ones aren't, and if they're not, you need to fix them. I want you to create equivalents where they don't exist. And you know that anyone who's taught 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade knows that all of the typical common mistakes that kids make when they are factoring, when they are doing the distributed property, when they are multiplying monomials by binomials, it's all sitting right there. And at the end of this lesson, we had the clearest sense of which kids this worked for and which 3 kids were still struggling. And so, I mean, why did I do that? Why? Because I think it's crazy to talk about any of this stuff in the abstract. I think that we've got to stop and say, what are we trying to accomplish when we talk about designing effective professional development? Well, there it is. I mean, 5 years ago, I had the honor of being the head of the writing team for NCTM's Principles to Actions. And frankly, given the way most reports are mediocre at best, and given the way, in fact, they get old and stale, it truly boggles my mind that here we are, almost 2020. We are talking about 5 years, almost 6 years, since Principles to Actions came out, and no one, nowhere, has sent me an email saying, you guys screwed up. No one has said you missed a practice. And on this very computer that I'm using right now, you can find all 21 drafts of these mathematical teaching practices. They were as few as 5. They were as many as 19. They were 10. Then it was 11. Then we went back to 10 because it's such a nice number. Then we said, no, they overlap. But look at what you just saw. What you just saw is a lesson where, and this is what really blew my mind, because the book had come out in 2014. Here we are, the end of 2015. The Common Core is real. The testing is going into place, and I'm watching these two kids do a lesson that you just saw, where the clarity of goals was so powerful, where they had 3 tasks, if you include the assessment, but really an opening task, a math workshop, a mini workshop. You saw the use of representations, draw a picture, how do you know? The entire class was driven by teachers' purposeful questions and the student discourse and their discussion. We were building fluency of these understandings, not by memorization, not by rules, but by conceptual understanding. The kids were expected to struggle, and in the end, I have clear evidence of what happened. There's another way to look at this. And I've been using this slide now for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, I use this in part when I look at any lesson, when I sit there and we talk about planning it. And so I'm just going to leave this up for a second and say to you another way of parsing this, another way of thinking about our professional development gap is how much professional development do we get on how to use context and not just naked stuff. I mean, except for polynomials, there's very little that we can't find context for. I mean, how about our questioning and not just punting? How about our slides and having our slides animated and having the key questions on our slides so we don't forget them and don't screw it up and don't have the questions remembered in one class and lost in another class, or remembered one year and forgotten in another? Where does our professional development recognize that perhaps the 2 most important things to teaching in today's world, where we need to make math work for all kids, or how did you see it, how did you see it, how did you see it, which means multiple representations. And how did you do it, who did it differently than that? That is alternative approaches. That notion that we will not help teachers help kids if we continue to teach math as the one right way, and the one right way to do it, the one right way to see it. And so this idea of sense making, this idea of gathering evidence, and I ask you, where and how does our professional development address these critical aspects of teaching and these critical aspects of quality? And so the result, I just think it's important for you to sort of just see it. I mean, there's Success Academy. I'm not going to spend any time on this. Just look at the top one. Look at the top in the middle, I mean, the pie chart. The pie chart shows that Success Academy is #1 in New York State, outperforming Jericho, East Williston, Syosset, Chappaqua, that's where the Clintons live, and Scarsdale, where, you know, the rich people. Just look at those numbers on the left, by the way. Look at the household income. 300,000, 120,000, 165,000, and in New York at Success Academy it's 32,000. Look at the funding per student. I mean, can you believe that Jericho actually spends $40,000 per kid? Can you believe that, I mean, Scarsdale's spending 30 and New York City is spending 14? And then look at this. I mean, the kids are all black or brown, as opposed to white, and or Asian. And then I just ask you to go over to the right. I'm sorry, but we spend a lot of time questioning, well, does it really work? And are they really cheating? And what are they doing? Well, all I can tell you is you just saw a typical lesson. You saw a typical lesson that results in all the things that it should result in, and that is high levels of learning by all kids. 94% of these kids pass math. And just as a quick aside here, not that Success Academy is like the paragon, but I got asked to help them do 8th grade Algebra 1 for all students 3 years ago. And I immediately said, forget it, I'm leaving. That's the kind of thing that only a foolish administrator imposes. It didn't work in California. It didn't work in Chicago. It is just a crazy idea. And they said, why is that? And I said, well, that's easy. It doesn't work because the 7th graders aren't ready. The 8th grade curriculum is bloated and nobody, dares to take things out of it. There's no real support for the students who are not measuring up. And there's no support for the teachers to effectively plan and implement this. And they told me, well, that's easy. Our seventh graders in Success Academy, as you know, are prepared. They're ready. And we can handle all the rest. And all I'm going to tell you is that I have been working with the eighth grade teachers in August for the last few years. And last year, 1,800 kids in all the middle schools took eighth grade algebra. Now, we sort of limited the stuff with polynomials. We minimized the quadratics so that it was only the stuff that's really on the regions. And 94% of the kids, 94% of the kids got a 3, 4, or 5, and that is past the regions. It's the first existence proof that eighth grade algebra can work for all when there's high quality professional development that's aligned with and designed to improve the quality of teaching and therefore learning. And so if this approximates an attainable gold standard, which I think it does, then I stop and say, well, there it is. It took me a half an hour to sort of dump on things, give you an example, whet your appetite, and now ask the fundamental question. What are the forms and structures of professional development that can bring that kind of teaching and learning to scale in your classroom, in your school, in your district, and in my nutty idea, across the country and around the world? I mean, how do we make that happen? And so the key things start with this. You all know, people simply won't do what they can't envision. I mean, years ago, Bill Clinton talked about people have to envision it or it won't happen. People push back if they don't believe it. People can't do if they don't understand. I mean, all the statistics that we're being asked to do now, right? All of the use of representations, if you don't understand what and why, it's not going to happen. People don't do well and can't do well what isn't practice, but you know that it's the feedback that comes from the practice that results in change, because without feedback, there's little change. And if we don't do it without collaboration, it's not sustainable. And so I've been using this slide and these ideas for a number of years now and saying to all of you, our job as professionals, our professional development at its core needs to help people envision what's possible. And that means video and co-teaching. It means coaching. It means worrying about what's happening with another pair of eyes in the room. We need to shift beliefs, and I only shift beliefs when I actually see my own kids doing stuff I didn't believe they can do. I understand the math in better ways because my professional development gives me those opportunities collaboratively. I practice it, but it's practiced with feedback and reflection, and I do it collaboratively. And so all professional development opportunities need to help us envision those shifts. They need to address the beliefs and mindsets. They need to link opportunities for practice and feedback more specifically. So I ask you, why is it for years, all around the country, all around the world, I ask, raise your hand if you've watched a colleague teach a math lesson in the last 2 months. Never do more than 10% of the hands go up. I said, who teaches all day long and has no prep periods and no free periods and no opportunities, to visit? And no hands go up. And so, I mean, the answers to nearly all of our challenges, I think reside to one degree or another within our schools. There are people already doing it. And you know that if your own kids were in your school, you know which teachers they would have and which ones they wouldn't. You know who's working their tail off to make things work better, right? No one knows it all, and there's no such thing as a perfect lesson or perfect teachers. I mean, we make mistakes all the time, and, someone knows and does things that we don't know, and we need to draw on that. And so why do we act as though there were these dragon-infested moats around our classrooms? I mean, I'm going to ask you to go ask the kids the week after Thanksgiving, who's the best language arts teacher in your school? They'll tell you. They know, okay? Go and watch a language arts teacher masterfully teach a class in an elementary school, in a middle school, in a high school. Go and watch how language arts is taught. And then the following week, go and watch the kids tell you is like the best math teacher in the school. Right? It's amazing what we see and what we learn. Right? You have prep periods. There's test periods when you can get coverage. I know principals that say, hey, tell me, I would love to have you go and visit a colleague. I will cover your class when you're doing a test. And then the three of us, you, the teacher you observe, and I will spend 15 minutes at the end of the day, because you've got to follow these up. It's got to be with discussion, and what do you really see? And I'll turn to that in a second. But pause and ask yourself, why is it that there is not a system of collegial visits with respectful debriefs in every single school? Why is it that we do not regularly observe our colleagues teach? Why is there such fear in that? Right, and there it is. Okay, I mean, it comes down to 3 questions or 3 points, right? I visited your math class earlier today, okay? And the discussion is as simple and as hard as what really impressed me was, and this was why. It always starts with the positive, because in every class there are positive things that, oh my goodness. When Kyle answered the question and was wrong, the way you supported him, the way in which you got the kids to help understand, the way in which Kyle walked away from that exchange realizing, oh, of course, that was foolish, now I understand it. The questions that I have about what you did or what I did, right? Let's consider some other things. I mean, it's very open about questions. It's not criticisms. It's like questions. It's things to consider. And then the most important point of all is 15 minutes of discussion ends with the 2 things that I will consider doing differently tomorrow, starting tomorrow. Both the observer and the one being observed, right? We grow, we stop, we pause, and then, you know, we say, come on in tomorrow, ask me, the coach. They ask someone else to come in and just monitor how often I do that. How about my wait time? How often I just turn and get the kids actively engaged, and we practice those things. You asked me to co-teach with you, but I mean, that's a visit using our own environments to capture good, indifferent, not so good, and use it so that collaboratively we are building a stronger program, right? So let me just pause for 1 second here. Ask yourself, why is that so hard? Why is it that we don't all do that? And more importantly, tell me that every single one of you in your roles couldn't institute a process of doing these collegial visits, of working with the principal on making it work, of using the people in the building in ways that enable these things, and then it's got to be done with the discussion afterwards. And so that's where, you know, this slide becomes so valuable. And again, that's all great, but how about that class that I saw at Success Academy? We didn't videotape it. How pathetic. I mean, what a difference between me sort of summarizing it and us watching a 12-minute edited down version. I mean, have you videotaped yourself? Not fun. It's scary, right? Have you critically reviewed the video by yourself? Have you done it with others? And so I just want to, again, pause and say, of all the possibilities for elevating the quality of what we do, we ignore videotape. I mean, you walk in with an iPad, you get everything you need. I put it in the back corner of the room. I only see the back of kids' heads or the side of their faces, and I keep the thing on the teacher and what they're saying. But the amazing ability of video to start and stop, to say what worked. Oh my God, look at that. Oh, that was really cool, right? I mean, we stop and say, you know, at 2.45, 2 minutes and 45 seconds, it was incredible. You actually waited 9 seconds. We look at that and we play it and we watch the kids. Was that enough? Should it have been more? Right? I mean, it's to me just a no-brainer, given how I believe I've improved my presentation skills in part by watching videotapes and scrolling up. I mean, it's not fun to watch when you are about to say something that you know is about to be stupid and all, but it's how I learn, and it's how we all learn. And so all I'm going to do is say that you know, my experience was in Westport, Connecticut many years ago. We're talking about 24 years ago. Westport was the highest performing school district in Connecticut. Westport is one of those amazing school districts where there are no zits. Every kid has their own personal dermatologist. I think the cheapest house in Westport is now about $1.8 million, something ridiculous like that. Staples, Bedford, and Collegial, the 2 middle schools and the high school, they are good. They're even very good. They were really good then. They called up and they said, but you know what? We know we're not great. We know that 85% is not 95%, and we think that we ought to have 95% of our kids scoring at the highest levels on your state tests. Why don't, I said, after watching teachers in all three schools, why don't we do something crazy? Why don't we each videotape one lesson every month, upload it onto a safe thing, and then randomly select one of those tapes for viewing and discussion at a monthly department meeting? Same thing. What I learned, what amazed me, what changes will I make? We uploaded the tapes and selected one for collegial viewing, and it's amazing what happened. And there it is. It's the same questions. I mean, we did numbers of video protocols and all that stuff. It ended up going on with, all right, so look at your notes. What really impressed us? What really impressed you? Why? What was it? I agree. No, I'm not sure. I understand why you would be impressed by that, but I was concerned about it. Good. The questions I have. What we're doing is we are collaboratively. All I'm going to say is that the two new teachers in the room, when we did this the very first time, said, can we be next? When have you ever heard teachers volunteer to be videotaped and show it to their colleagues? Except they couldn't believe how gentle and positive and constructive their colleagues were. Can we be next? That just says that this is something that people understand can have real value. And when it ends with, one more time, the two things that I'll consider doing differently starting tomorrow, and we don't overload each other. We recognize that you need at least 4 weeks. You may need 6 and 8 weeks. Just worrying about two things. That's it. Then we can polish it. Then we can build it. And so that to me is professional development. I'm going to skip over these slides. You can go find them. But I mean, a deeper analysis, I did a more in-depth rubric for observations and for the review of video, getting at the tasks and the explanations and the representations, things like that. We always worry about, did you ask why? How do you know? Can you convince us? What evidence of learning? And did you maintain a focus on the key core idea? Again, I was struck years later how the principles to actions and the lesson at Success Academy align with these categories of deeper analysis. And so as I see we are entering the final quarter here, and then there are seminars. I mean, it's like, that's how people grow and learn. You know, think about your last grade level meeting or grade band or department meeting, all right? I mean, what was the balance between teaching and learning on the one hand and administrivia on the other, right? I mean, when did you last engage in a collegial seminar about a critical topic or a critical issue? When did you do a reading ahead of time for only 2 or 3 pages, right? When was one person assigned the responsibility to orchestrate that? And so again, I think that you all know that we've got to bootstrap ourselves. We've got to sit there and say, hey, you know what? I want you guys to see these 2 Desmos activities that I used with my kids last week. I just, you know, and then we go on. I think that we all ought to look at the conclusions from this report about homework. I mean, we're all doing homework in different ways, and the kid sends the kids and the parents all these crazy messages. Why don't we sit there and say that there's no consistency and there's not a whole lot of belief that what we're doing with homework is helpful and is really working? So, I mean, just pausing and thinking about there they are, Desmos apps. Equivalent fractions for grades 3 and 4 because it's so important. Retesting. I don't want to get into that right now, but I've been asking over and over and over again, why is there only one shot? Why is there no retesting policy? And I don't understand why the kids have one chance. Okay, why don't we go to Emergent Math as a resource? That's a website, Emergent Math, and go and look what's there. What about the 7th grade statistics and the probability that, in fact, most of us are skipping and yet is so important? When are we going to look at some of Graham Fletcher's 3-act lessons or Dan Meyer's 3-act lessons? When are we going to all read Fluency Without Fear? The bottom line is that there are all of these possible fodder for professional seminars. And so, you know, it's all cost-free. I mean, collegial visits, videotaping. I mean, I ask you, which ones can't you do? Why does that not become the way in which the math department operates, the way in which mathematics is discussed in the elementary school, in the grade band, as part of expanding the impact of our PLCs, right? And so all I want to do is then say, there's one last piece, and I've been calling it micro PD because I've spent so many years doing the after-school professional development. I've done the flit in and flit out. I've done every possible thing that the research says and common sense says has no impact. And so you finally get to be, 65, 5 years ago, 70 now, and I'm sorry, but I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to waste your time. I don't have time to sort of tell and show and model things that I know don't work. And so more and more and more, I've been working with a different model of professional development. I was with Joellen Killian, who is, formerly with the National Staff Development Council and is now an adjunct and researcher with them. They're Learning Forward. And I mean, she basically is the smartest person in the United States about professional development, the deepest thinker about it. And we've gone back and forth because she really was upset with AIR and the work that we did that showed that professional development didn't work. And we now are in complete agreement because we agree that it didn't work because it did not align with Learning Forward standards. And part of what aligns with those standards is, so here's what I now do. I sit with all the fourth grade teachers who have been freed up for an entire day. That is 6, 7 people. I sit with all the Algebra 1 teachers at a school in Deer Valley, north of Phoenix. I sit with all the 7th grade teachers at a middle school outside of Chicago. And I start by saying, let's stipulate, this teaching math so it works for more students is just damn hard to do. Let's stipulate that in many ways we've been set up and we've been provided far too little useful guidance. And let's be clear, the consistent quality of instruction requires collaboration and change, and that's what I'd like to have happen today. And so I start with the challenges. Before we do any planning, we sit there and talk about, so you're teaching Algebra 3, 4. No, wait a second, you're at 4th grade. What are the things that are the biggest challenges? What is working? Which chapters, which units do you worry about? We have a discussion as colleagues, and then we turn to the agenda. Right, today's agenda is very simple. Introductions, we've done that. We've done our challenges. We're going to plan a lesson. We take anywhere from 45 to an hour and 15 minutes. I then teach the lesson. I'm not going to ask people to do anything that I will not do myself. I teach the lesson, we come back in and we debrief it in all the ways that you've just seen. What worked and why? What questions do you have? What changes? I find those discussions invaluable. We then have lunch in lots of places. I've now learned that when you treat people like professionals, they act like professionals. And so I take everyone out for lunch because it's just something that I'm able to do. And then I co-teach a lesson with one of the teachers, a different class. Nothing makes me happier than when the lesson they teach is significantly better than the one that I taught in the morning. They make adjustments, they teach a lesson they're comfortable with, and then we come back and we do a concluding debrief about, let's compare the lessons, what do we have, and then the last 15 minutes is all around, what do you do differently starting tomorrow? Okay, we go and we worry about these elements of quality that we've talked about as the essence of our discussion, right? And go back. And what we do in this mini professional development is actually act on what we know. We are helping people envision, both me and someone else. The Algebra 1 class that we did at Deer Valley, I did a credible job. It was fun. We had a great discussion about the things that I did that worked. The teachers saying, I can't believe you got some of those kids that don't speak English at home actively engaged. And we talked about how did I do that? What happened? What made it comfortable? Right? And then after lunch, the other Algebra 1 teacher used a Desmos activity and did some cumulative review, and the lesson was just magical. And none of his colleagues had ever seen Desmos used before, and I didn't have to go back. I mean, I knew that those people in their weekly meetings were changing what they did and how they did it. They were pushing back on what they believed. They were building understanding. They were giving each other feedback. And so that, to me, is my best shot at What I think is how, between the seminars and the classroom visits and the micro PD and the videotaping, things to think about as we find ways to help people become better. Because I think every one of us knows that the single most serious problem is the isolation of the professional and how deadly that isolation is. And so once again, this was a lecture, and you all know that, which is not the ideal way, but I sort of justify it by saying, I've just given you a whole lot of what I've learned, what I've tried. You've got all these slides, and the important thing is you decide how to use them. You decide which one or two pieces make sense. My email address is sitting right over here on the first slide. Okay, I spend untold hours responding to email. I just think that, again, at 70, it's my responsibility. And so I got the thank you, but I thank you. I thank you for taking this time. I thank you for your professionalism, and I thank you on behalf of the kids and your colleagues who benefit from these things. But seriously, guys, any number of things are on my website, but more importantly, it's the sleinwand@air.org where, well, what about this? And have you tried this? And I've had this problem. And you will almost always get a response within 36 hours. So Lee, thank you so much for setting this up. Thank you to the Global Math Department and to the whole array of opportunities. I'm going to stop there, and I wish you all a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for being here tonight.